Hello there. Well, it's something just a little bit different today. I'm in AYR, and the plan is to have a look at some old images of AYR, some maybe not that old, maybe just a few decades old, and compare them with footage I'm going to take today. I think for anybody who's visited AYR in the past couple of years, you will have noticed the large number of shops on the main streets in the town, the high street and other streets. An awful lot of shops that are to let, big to let notices outside these shops. And it's a situation you can see in a lot of places in Scotland. And there's many reasons for this decline in what you might term our high streets. I mean, you can look at other towns in Scotland that I can think of, maybe Dumfries and Paisley, and they are amongst other towns that have suffered a decline in their high street has really gone downhill, even Sucket Hall Street in Glasgow in fact. And most of this is going to be voiceover. We'll have a look at some of these older and not so old images, compare it with modern footage. It will be a voiceover job. I may say a few words at the end, I'm not sure. Let's just see how we go with this. I hope you enjoy what follows.
A trip to the seaside on an old steam train, the stuff of dreams. This image, taken by John R. Hume in 1966, shows the very grand station hotel in the background. The hotel has lain unused for a decade and is now covered in scaffolding and plastic. Perhaps as AYR's fortunes improve, it will once again find a use in providing accommodation for visitors. We simply can't allow such a grand and majestic structure to fall to bits. Just a short distance from the station is Burns Statue Square, shown here in the 19th century. Thankfully, not a lot has changed in this view today. Most of the buildings have survived intact, and the only notable difference is the addition of that rather ugly white square building in the centre of the photo. This image of the High Street dates to the 1860s or 70s and shows a street lined largely with two-storey cottages, about a half dozen of which are thatched. The thatched building on the right was, and still is today, the Tam O'Shanter Inn, said to have been frequented by poet Robert Burns. You can see more detail in this photo, also dating to the 1860s or 70s, with a lamp and painting above the door. In this image of around 1880, the lamp has gone, but the frontage looks much the same. Today's Tam O'Shanter also looks much the same, with a new painting dating to 1956 and a wonderful new lamp. It really is a joy to think that you can go in there for a beer today and peer out of those same little windows onto the high street. Here we see some shops on the narrow Newmarket Street in the 1970s. To the left of that lovely arched doorway is the district sales office of the National Coal Board, and the general look is of a street that is bustling. Sadly, these days we no longer have a coal industry, and the same view today looks a little sad. You can still see that arched doorway, but you can also see a couple of to let signs that are sadly all too common in parts of AYR and in other Scottish towns. On to Sandgate Street now, and this wonderful old photo dating to 1859. When compared with modern footage, which I'll show you shortly, you can see that many of these buildings have survived. The most obvious one is, of course, the tall tower of AYR Town Hall, or Assembly Rooms. But in fact, most buildings between there and where the carriage is on the right have survived, the exceptions being the two on the left of the building with the arch window. In this slightly later photo of the 1860s or 70s, the building on the far right has changed, and beside that building with the arched window are the two new buildings that remain to this day. I am greatly encouraged to be able to say that not a great deal has changed in this part of Sandgate Street. And so to Wellington Square, seen here in the 1860s or 70s, showing the statue of James George Smith Neal. Don't ask who he is, I haven't got a clue, but he was clearly a man who used up more than his fair share of names. And also the grand-looking county buildings. Apart from a big "What's On" sign, the scene looks much the same today. Back onto the High Street and its junction with Kirkport. An image dating to the mid-1970s, clearly showing a bustling thoroughfare and a variety of open shops. The same view today tells a very different story, with a pawnbroker and 3 shops to let. And yet, for all its look of desolation and abandonment, all the buildings have survived. Towards the foot of the High Street now, and a small area once known as Fish Cross. This photo dates to 1986, and you can see that the rot is really starting to set in, with 3 to let signs and an eager traffic warden. But still there are folk looking in shop windows, and keen to pick up any bargains before it all comes to an end. Today, thankfully, all these buildings have survived, and it is the sheer variety of the architecture that makes the location interesting. What is also interesting is that the barber's on the corner, in the same premises called Thrifty's in the 1986 photo, is still to let. From a shopping point of view, the prospect here can at best be described as grim. Hard to imagine that way back in the 19th century this cross was absolutely heaving with activity. I'm not entirely sure where this image was taken from, possibly the end of Hope Street, but at least the William Wallace statue still survives, even if at a slightly different spot. And so to the old bridge, seen here in the drawing dating to 1789 and captured from the Black Bull Inn. It's just such a lovely scene. The view today retains a certain amount of charm, which is unfortunately spoiled somewhat by the bland brick box of Marks and Spencer's on the left. How on earth did we allow planning permission for such a monstrosity in an area of scenic and historical beauty? Another view of the old bridge, this time captured in the 1860s or 70s. Here you can see the variety of shape and form in the buildings on the left of the bridge, a variety that adds immeasurably to the scenic charm. We also get a glimpse of the more recent bridge and the masts of sailing ships in the harbour. Today, the same view is dominated by the ugly Marks and Spencer's building. On the right of the bridge, buildings have been demolished to make way for a public event space, whatever that is. Those flattened buildings included an old historic townhouse. And I suppose the question is, why is the Marks and Spencer building still standing? Slightly different view of the more recent bridge, captured in the 1860s or 70s, and a good look at sailing ships in the harbour. Rather sad to see today that many buildings to the left of the church have been demolished and replaced with red brick housing, which at least varies in size and shape. A 19th century view over the bridge to New Bridge Street and the old Tolbooth, which was removed in the 1820s. It's just such a lovely scene in old AYR, with those wonderful jumbly buildings sitting on the banks of the River AYR between the two bridges, and cows meandering here and there in the middle of the road. It's a very different view today. A view of York Street Lane in 1966, as taken by John R. Hume, a man whose body of photographic work is as important as that of Thomas Annan, if not more so. The image pretty much speaks for itself, in that it shows industrial buildings and one of AYR's many mills. The same view today is, well, the same, but different. The mill building is still there, but it's no longer a mill. It's now housing. You can see that they've added another floor at the top, bricked up the two end windows, and allowed that lovely old painted sign to vanish. Was it allowed to deteriorate and vanish with time and the elements, or was it actually removed, which in my opinion would be criminal? The Anchor Bar in South Harbour Street, beside the new bridge and the river, in the mid-1970s. Today, I am delighted to say that view has changed not one jot. All these buildings have survived intact. More industrial buildings captured by John R. Hume in 1976 in South Harbour Street by the wall of the old fort. Like way too many old, disused industrial buildings, they were damaged by fire. On the far right you can see the only remaining bartizan or lookout turret of Cromwell's fort, which is now the only thing left in that view today. Here's that old Fort Bartizan today, from a different angle. And while we can see a number of things that tell us that this is AYR, it's a very different view from long ago, as seen here in a view of Auld Ayr in 1802. Well, that was AYR. And I strongly suspect that the majority of visitors to AYR will in fact go straight to Alloway and miss AYR completely. Immerse ourselves in the Burns experience and miss a lot of really good stuff in AYR itself. I love wandering around the streets of AYR and indeed in other towns in Scotland. And it's the architecture and the variety of architecture that makes a wander along a town streets interesting. And AYR certainly has a lot of varied and very interesting architecture. Makes the whole experience more than enjoyable. And it's good that you can still go into inns like the Tam O'Shanter Inn in the High Street, which is still an inn, it's still a thatched inn, and you can go in and have a beer. That's a great thing. And where the old fort used to be, and we saw the tiny little bit that's left of it, there used to be a brewery inside the fort, after it was a fort obviously, and it was called appropriately enough the Fort Brewery. It's gone, but AYR still does have a brewery. It's the AYR Brewing Company. It's in the Glen Park Hotel, and that's exactly where I am right now. Can't think of a better place to end a small adventure. And this is a pint of Leesy Lundy, a pale ale, 3.8%. So it's not too strong, it'll replace a lot of the fluid that I've lost en route. They're doing quite a lot of building at the bottom end of the high street near the fish market, beside what used to be Marks and Spencer's, British Home Stores, etc. And when you look at these buildings, in particular the Marks and Spencer's building and the British Home Stores building, you wonder how we get away with building such things. They're just bland, boring monstrosities that have done nothing whatsoever for AYR. If that's the sort of building we're going to demolish, then that's got to be a good thing. That said, those two buildings seem to be still standing and have demolished. I don't know what it was that was beside the Marks and Spencer's building. I hope it wasn't an old row of structures. But you know, places, towns change, buildings come and go, industries come and go. And as I touched on earlier, the
the sort of situation in many towns in Scotland where high streets are struggling and lots of shops are for let is because of a combination of things. We simply don't have the same level of industry that we once had. We don't have the same level of employment that we once had. And people simply don't have the same amount of money to spend. So shops aren't seeing the trade they used to get. And obviously shopping centres come into this situation, out of town shopping centres. Somebody I was speaking to earlier suggested that the Silverburn shopping centre, which is on the outskirts of Glasgow, was used quite a lot by people in there, which surprised me. I found that sounds a bit unusual, but it's just, you know, it's an indication that people, in order to get in their weekly shop, will leave a town and simply forget about the streets in the town in which they stay, and that's very sad. But hopefully organisations like AYR will, as I said earlier, arrest this situation, and AYR will become a really very desirable place for visitors. It already is. You just have to realise that for yourself. I'm Eddie Burns. Bye for now.